Welcome back, dear viewers. Diving into the heart of our story, Part 2 unfolds with a moment of truth knocking at the door, a dinner of hope and heartache, and a conversation that could change everything. Keep in mind that this story has two endings, and you are now listening to the first. You can find the second on this same playlist. In this chapter, we stand on the threshold of revelations, where confessions are made and the past collides with the present. Can love, plagued by secrets and silent battles, find its way to trust? Or can certain truths destroy the very fabric of bonds once thought unbreakable? Join us as we explore the complexities of love, the intricacies of human emotion, and the courage it takes to face the truth. Remember, those who want to delve deeper into the depths of this story will find the full version on our Patreon. Let's journey together into the unknown, where the heart speaks its truths and love finds its way through the storm. And she was hiding it. Chapter 2. I knock resolutely on the door of the fourth-floor apartment and say, "Robert MacDonald, this is your wife, the woman you've been married to for the last 25 years. I am the mother of your 2 sons and the man who loves you more than his own life. I have always loved you and always will. But I want to tell you a love story that involves me and someone else. After all we've meant to each other all these years, you need to hear me out. I'll be downstairs with dinner waiting for me. You can eat and then listen to my story," I say through the tightly closed door. About an hour later, he comes down for dinner. I have some expensive steaks and a bottle of good Cabernet. We eat, and then I start. I talk to him from the heart. I don't lie and I don't cover up. Rob's hiding from the truth is over. I met a wonderful man who was there for me when I needed him. First, he helped me with delicate matters when I was in a terrible situation. And then he took care of my children and me when I was alone. I begin. Something was wrong. You could feel it in the sound of the engines. The F-14 Tomcat was sluggish. Its performance was clearly impaired. The pilot didn't seem to notice it, but I knew. Before dawn, we were ejected from the deck of the USS Eisenhower. We were on our way to Riyadh, and one last meeting, hurried, rushed like everything else. We were going to war. All the preparations were made. I had to see to the last details and return in time to see the first airplanes. The war was 1 day away. When the sun came up, we were flying at over 20,000 feet above the speed of sound. The engines cut out. The momentum carried the airplane forward, but not for long. The 43,000-pound plane won't fly for long. Then it will fall. It wouldn't glide, it wouldn't maneuver, it would fall. The pilot conducted a restart. Nothing. Again, nothing. We began to fall into the dark sea. "Time to taxi, sir," he asked in a voice that should have been impassive, but which gave away every pilot's worst fear. "Reboot," I said. Nothing. Faster and faster. It falls into the dark water. "Turn off the fuel and try again," I said. "That's crazy." "Do it now." I woke up to the fact that we had fallen into the water. It wasn't the first time I'd had this dream. It was the first time I woke up alone in bed. It was always Karen with me before. Unlike the dream in real life, the airplane's engines started. The problem was the fuel. It was contaminated. One of those mistakes that happen on the road to war. Ultimately, it's my own fault as the person in charge. But we got lucky. I caught it, nearly taking my life. The emergency reserve was unharmed. The engine started on the reserve tank as soon as the main supply was cut off. We immediately headed back out, and I checked all the fuel. My flight to Riyadh that day was at Mach 2. There was no way I could have gotten out of formation and come back to fix the problem. I can only imagine how many airplanes we could have lost, but the engines told me, and I caught the problem. Why had I fallen into the water in my dream, since I had lost Karen? The fact of that loss hit me harder than death. There is a knock on the back door. There's a short porch by the back stairs. Someone is there. I open the door, and Avril Dumonte walks in stilettos. She came to visit a week after Karen and I talked about Philip. The conversation about what they did. Karen somehow expected me to shrug my shoulders and put it behind me. I couldn't and retreated to my fourth-floor apartment. "Mon Dieu, such a scream," Avril says. "Sorry to bother you, but what are you doing here?" said I. I was sitting on the top veranda when you shouted. The view of the university from the top of the hill is so beautiful. Sorry, bad dream, but come on, I'll show you the river, I said. We walked to the front of the house. She is wearing a McGill t-shirt, blue jeans, and these extravagant heeled shoes. The shirt and jeans must be really small. They're as tight as anything I've ever seen. The outfit is too skimpy for an October morning, but I can barely speak. I'm in just boxers. I can't look outside. The windows are too high up, she says. Come up here, I said. I led her upstairs where the attic was set up. The fourth floor had been added as a raised floor. It was built to make the house look like an ornate Italianate style, rather than Greek classical. We built an apartment and rented it out for a while until our finances improved. Eventually, my oldest son took it over. The front of the apartment had a cathedral ceiling with a large sleeping loft built into it. I now escorted Avril into the attic. Her short figure was perfect for the place. The dormer windows look so small from the outside, but I could stand in them. And you're right. The view of the river is just breathtaking, she said. Glad you like it. You have a beautiful home. It's bigger than our house in Mont-Royal, but it's too big for two people. Even for those who intend to live apart, she said in a scolding tone. Well, you've seen the view, I said. I'm not done yet. We need to talk, she said, looking me over from head to toe. You're an attractive man. Men like that shouldn't sleep alone with their nightmares, she said. Circumstances got the best of me, I said, trying to put some sarcasm in my voice. What a foolish man you are. The most beautiful woman who loves you sleeps alone with her bad dreams in this very house, she said, as she went down to the living room. What do you want, Mrs. Dumonte? Said I. I want you to stop hating my poor Philip, who can no longer defend himself. What makes you think I hate him? Now you think I'm stupid, she said, as she sat down at the table. Coffee would be handy while we talk. I should kick her out, I thought. She is dangerous, but how ridiculous for a man to be afraid of such a small creature. Don't you want some tea? I asked. No coffee this morning. We have serious things to discuss, she said. It takes me a few minutes to make coffee while I watch her. She keeps her cool and feels quite comfortable sitting in a room with a man like that. I, on the other hand, feel awkward and out of place. I take cream and sugar. Not black and bitter like some barbaric American, she says with a note of laughter in her voice. She knows how I drink my coffee. What else does she know about me? All I know is that she's the widow of the man who seduced my wife. I set the coffee with cream and sugar in front of her. I turn around to put on my sweater. Don't put it on. I am an old woman, and so I am enjoying myself. Don't deprive me of the pleasure, she said. I hesitate, but still sit down in my boxers and sip my coffee. We have a lot in common, Avril Dumonte began. We married people who are passionate, but also quite reserved and introverted. Perhaps the biggest difference between us that I've noticed is that where you're shy, I'm not. Maybe that's why we reacted so differently, or maybe it's the difference in genders or cultures or whatever. My mother was a war bride. She was Japanese and moved to Montreal after the World War, following my French-Canadian father. I was their fourth child, their last, and their only girl. It wasn't easy being half Japanese after the war. It's not easy now, but my Philippe has never seen me like this. If you could have known him, what a man he was. Tall and elegant, he towered above the crowd. But I'm not just talking about physical appearance. He had a gift, and he shone with that light of genius. Philip was a great artist, even at the age of 26. He walked around the McGill campus like a prince. He was a drawing instructor and a professor of conservation. I was a humble first-year student. I worshipped at the altar of this animated Phoebus, a little swarthy girl, half this, half that. That he paid attention to me at all was a miracle. But when he kissed me, I suffered a horrible death. Do you know what that is? The little death that lovers experience when they feel their breath leave them and their heart stop. Why we got married, I don't know. We were so wrong, and neither family was happy. Philip had the most meager income. I was not yet 19. A silly girl, but so much in love. We lived on him fixing other people's work because it paid. He should have taken up painting, but I got pregnant too soon. Things were different then. Birth control wasn't as reliable. We could have done something about it, but we were too Catholic to live with it. We were poor. We had nothing but children and love. So much love. I would never be so happy again. But I knew it couldn't last. It was too heavy for me. Simone was 7 and Susanna was 5 when I noticed the discontent in him. The evenings were still extraordinary, but there was a gleam in his eyes. He had a great need, a great talent, and a great appetite for life. What would you have me do? Hug him so tightly that I would strangle the life out of our love? I should have held him with open arms. I offered to look at the others. His blue eyes read relief. I chose my men so as not to compete. Smaller boys, more physical and far less experienced. They delivered pleasure without threat. I hoped he would do the same. He did until he met her. It was my worst fear. Such a perfect woman. Tall. Blonde. With red hair. She had skin, as they say, peach and cream, and big magical brown eyes. If she only had those looks. But she was so much more. I think it's so obvious in her portrait. The sly smile contrasting with the guileless eyes. The combination of her sensuality and her innocence is so appealing that no man can resist. As if teasing me, I recognized what a true heart she has, what a beautiful woman she is. Could a little half-Japanese girl compete with her? And then she made me fall in love with her. At first, it seemed like the affair was over. She had a husband and small children. She didn't want to leave her husband, and Philip didn't ask her to. They loved each other with pure love, wanting the best for each other. But then the husband was gone. Did he find them? Philip moved in with us. I was distraught. Surely now I would lose my love. I had seen how brightly their love burned, and yet they had wonderful little boys to take care of. When I arrived that first weekend in that horrible, uncultured Albany, a blanket of grief and fear hung over the sweet home. The husband was gone, but she was grieving for him and burdened with worries. The little boys were troubled, not understanding their mother's grief. No one wanted to talk about the missing man. We got to some movie where he left the scene, but he was expected back for a happy ending, only perhaps it was a tragedy. Philippe began to play the part of the good and faithful lover to the very end. I look you in the eye when I tell you that I have never been more proud to be the wife of Philippe Dumontet. He didn't give up his love because it was inconvenient or difficult. He loved this woman, she needed help, and he was there for her. It was her husband who somehow failed her. I realized then that Philip would never leave me. No matter what happened, he would always be my Philip. He was the rarest of beings, a truly good man. They say that no Christmas compares to what we experience as children. This is nonsense, because it is what we share with our true loved ones that will always burn brightest in our souls. Karen came to Montreal that year and stole our hearts as well as Philip's. I had no sister, but now I had 1 and 2 little boys to share with my daughters. It was a happy time in a home that was filled with joy. But beneath the joy was a sadness for a man who was far away, in danger that no one spoke of. December 1990 was snowy in Montreal. We made snowmen for the little boys. We took them to a puppet show and watched the older one try to hide his tears when his father called from afar. He was told he had to be brave like his daddy. Karen only whispered, "Thank God, he's still alive." Your family has become part of our family. I don't regret it. It's the right thing to do. Karen will always be my sister, just like Philip will always be my husband. Nothing you can do will change that, but I hurt my sister because I'm a selfish woman. I'm lost without my Philippe. He is always in my thoughts. That day, I came with her picture to share with Karen. It was reckless. I should have known. Maybe somewhere inside I knew, but I came anyway. We're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. I'm lost without my Philip. I need my sister. There's a part of him in her, and I need that part. Please, I beg you, forgive her. It wasn't sin, only love. Avril Dumont broke down. She sobbed uncontrollably. All the grief and loss she had experienced overwhelmed her. She stripped herself bare before me, removed the mask of confidence from her face, and revealed the vulnerable woman that lurked beneath. I was right, she was dangerous. She had real courage and was more than worthy of a man with only physical courage. I took her into my arms. She cried as she clung to me, and I stroked her head like a child. She surpassed me, touched my heart, and quieted my anger. She wounded my pride by showing me her boundless love. We went down the stairs. I carried her in my arms. She was so small, so light and so brave. Her head rested on my shoulder, and her tears flowed. We found Karen in the first-floor kitchen. When she saw Avril, she screamed at me, "You bastard, what you did to her." They came together, these two women, so different physically but united in spirit. I retreated up the stairs, naked to the core and disturbed to the core. Later, Karen came up the stairs. She knocked softly. "Rob, can I talk to you for a moment to apologize?" she said quietly through the door. When I opened the door, she threw herself into my arms. "Please, please, I'm so sorry," she said, and tears ran down the wool shirt I wore. She tried to explain again, but I stopped her. "There's no need," I said. Avril explained everything. We sat on the strange half couch my son had left behind when he moved to Chicago, and she leaned against me. We were silent for a long time. I had nothing to say, and she was afraid to speak. Finally, it got too hard for her. "What's going to happen to us?" she asked. "I don't really know. I'm too confused. That seems like more than you can ask of a man," I said. "Could we pretend for a while that this didn't happen? Just until we see if there is a way forward," she said. "And how would that work? Love." She smiled. "If you still love me, we'll find a way." "How long are we going to ignore the past?" "I'm not asking for forever, just until January. I need to help Avril. She's suffering so much and I feel I owe her. If this hurts you, I'm sorry," she said. "Yes, I'm hurt, but I also sympathize with Avril. All she did was love someone infinitely. I don't believe I could do what she did," I said. Karen started crying again. "I'm so sorry," she said. So began a new period of my life and marriage. Karen was helping Avril with an exhibition of Philip's work. The exhibition was first held in New York and then was to tour the country. It was a significant project with over 150 works from various owners, collectors, and museums. The opening was scheduled for mid-January. Karen's plan, if it could be called that, was to postpone the confrontation of our problems until the first of the year. In January, Karen and I were to seek marriage counseling. The temporary arrangement was to ignore the problem, to pretend that even though Avril was living in the house while she and Karen were working, what had happened had somehow not happened. It might even have worked, but we hadn't fully taken Avril, her and our families into account. By October 5th, Karen had taken a leave of absence from the state for the rest of the year. I tried to immerse myself in work. A new engine had been developed, completely experimental. If successful, it would allow the plane to reach orbit. It had a thrust of 80,000 pounds. There was only one problem. It never came close to 80. The government got me involved. The university was ecstatic because the contract was huge. The work was supposedly secret, but how could you keep secret a project that thousands of engineers and scientists were already working on? The car itself was a monster. It was not a pretty monster. It sucked air and burned fuel faster than any engine ever built. It was its speed that made it efficient and lightweight, but it never equaled its paper performance. She had her own problems, not unlike my marriage. She was a wonderful distraction, but I tried not to like her. Something told me that my work might have been the reason I'd lost Karen to Philip. After all, that was how I perceived it. Philip had accepted her and loved her. The hidden life they led was a part of her that I would never have. Maybe I was jealous or narcissistic or just plain stupid. I felt that Philip made me second, that what Karen and I had would never compare to what she and he had. Avril was right. I hated him. A man I couldn't know except through his women. It seemed I couldn't escape those women and therefore couldn't escape Philippe Dumontet. The problems began with the arrival of Simone's daughter. First, she arrived with her children, 5 of them. 2 older foster children and 3 of her own. Soon, her husband showed up, and then her sister Suzanne with her husband and 2 children. All of them were happy to see Aunt Karen as they knew her well. The grandmothers were next, Amy Lefebvre, who was 81, Avril's mother, and then Grande Dame Sarah Marie Pascale Dumontet. She was 95, but you couldn't tell that from her. The tall, slender woman was the center of any room she entered. 2 uncles had come just for the holiday, and 4 other cousins, all women in their 20s, had made the trip to New York after Thanksgiving, their Thanksgiving, not ours. The appearance of my oldest son, with his new girlfriend, quite cute and with a Midwestern accent, was not a surprise. The shock was the appearance of Oscar, with his friend Mark in tow. The house, which had seemed empty the week before, was now filled with people. They were all here to celebrate Thanksgiving in October, a Canadian holiday, and to support Avril in what was becoming her life's work, getting Philip the recognition she felt he deserved. Our house became Avril's home. Her family simply swallowed up mine. In my naivete, I still believed that I was living apart and would probably be alone and lonely. Beds were the first problem. There was no problem with the children. Several groups at the university made loft beds for the dorm rooms to expand the space. 4 sets of bunk beds for 2 of the 3 bedrooms on the 3rd floor were not a problem. The beds in those 2 rooms were pushed together. The uncles shared the 3rd bedroom on the 3rd floor. The grandmothers occupied a 2-room guest room on the 2nd floor with a small bathroom. Very convenient, said Mrs. Lefebvre. Oscar, Mark, Kevin, and a girl I think was named Laura occupied the basement with the gym, laundry room, spare kitchen, and hot tub. They slept together in the gym on rented cots. I asked why a girl wouldn't mind sleeping with 3 guys, but got no answer, only a shrug. The cousins took over the living rooms, sleeping on the couches. Avril's daughters and their husbands moved to the 4th floor, leaving the back bedroom on the 2nd floor for Avril, Karen, and me. I only found this out after I got home to the crazy house of people on Thursday night. All the sleeping quarters were already taken, and the whole huge group was dining on pizza from a wood-fired oven from a high-end purveyor on the south side of town. I hadn't gone near our former bedroom since Karen's painting came up. I didn't think I'd ever be able to look at that room the old way again. My day was not going well. The monster sitting in the lab at the university wouldn't speak to me. She was a quiet lady who was not easy to tame. She bothered me. All that power she possessed and so little control. My thoughts were occupied with other things as I entered the house, which had filled to capacity with people just days before. They looked at me with casual familiarity, as if I were a member of this large family that now included my 2 sons and Karen. I felt more alienated from Karen and the boys now than ever before. Had they been mine all these years, or had I shared them? Where do we sleep? I said we were at the very end of the main kitchen, in an ale formed from an old porch railing. I was feeding 3 cats. 2 were domestic, affectionate and sweet. These 2 belonged to Karen. The 3rd one she picked out herself, but from the beginning, Aggie was mine. No, pet my Aggie. She was named after an agate marble because of her coloring. She was half the size of the others and 10 times the size of a cat. No uninvited mouse, no wayward bat, no pigeon was safe. She knew her territory and kept track of it. Eggie was what every old house needed, a vigilant and fearless protector. Please, the house won't be vacant until next week. We'll all be in Montreal for Christmas, and you can make some excuse if you don't want to come, Karen said. I didn't answer. I felt pressured. Please, that would be too difficult to explain. They don't know how things are. It's only a few days, she said. Okay, I guess I can sleep with my wife for less than a week, I said. Karen averted her gaze, and something told me there was more to it. Karen, what aren't you telling me? Nothing. We just have too few beds to worry about your grievances at the moment. These people don't see things your way. Please don't make a fuss, she said. Karen came out quickly while I tried to finish up with the pets. I tried in vain to corner Avril or Karen that night, but there were too many people, and they all wanted to meet Aunt Karen's husband. Weren't Karen and Avril 2 of the most wonderful women, and wasn't I lucky? What do you do? Sarah Marie demanded, her accent thick, and she was proud of it. Before I could answer, Madame Lefebvre intervened. He's a mechanic, and works at the university up on the hill. He fixes their airplane engines, she said, very proud of her information. It was well received. Sarah obviously approved of honest working men. In her opinion, every man could not be an artist. You can't eat paint and canvas, she said. Are they paying you fairly, or do you still have to serve in the military for extra money? Amy Lefebvre asked with a single trace of an accent that was a little more than you were used to hearing. I wondered where she got that information. She knew something, even if not exactly. Yes, they pay me well, and I'm no longer on reserve, I said, which seemed to make them happy. They were two delightful people, and I could have spent the night talking, but I needed to find Karen or Avril, but by the time I left, they were nowhere to be found. They had slipped away somewhere. They were up to something. I'm not stupid. Putting Karen next to me was the plan all along. It would be difficult, but I planned to resist temptation. Later I would realize how simple and innocent I was. These two women had no trouble achieving their goal. Various family members had no trouble keeping me occupied. I was tired after a long day at work, and not used to socializing with so many people. I decided to stake out a spot in bed, and let Karen find me sleeping when she got to bed. When I got to the bedroom, it was empty. The bed was neatly made, and all of my clothes and personal belongings were neatly organized. A third small dresser appeared, and Karen's closet revealed Avril. This was something I hadn't noticed. I knew they slept together and assumed Avril had found another place to sleep. I fumbled for the only pajamas I had. I wasn't going to sleep in my pants this night. When I got to the bed, I fell asleep immediately. I was too tired for the games the women wanted to play. The dream started innocently. I walked up the hill and entered my laboratory. For some reason, there was no one around. There are guards at the school, but no one was there. There was no engine either, but there was my cat Aggie. She was sitting where the engine should be. Then there was another Eggie, then a third, and finally a fourth. They seemed to be peacefully lined up, but as I approached them, they turned into a huge fire-breathing cat. I shuddered in surprise. I was about to be engulfed in flames. I was sandwiched between two women. Another bad dream, Robert, Avril said. An airplane again? Asked Karen. I could feel their breath. No fire-breathing cat, I said. I couldn't turn around or move away from the bed, which was big enough for two, but had 3 people crammed on it. The women didn't seem to mind, and they were comfortable enough. I knew they had thought this through a long time ago. It was even convenient that Avril was around, and Karen would have to behave herself. I managed to fall asleep again. I'll deal with this in the morning. When I woke up, Avril was already up and showering. The small bathroom in the back bedroom we occupied only had a shower. She walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. The women exchanged air kisses, and then Karen noticed that I was awake. Karen leaned over to me and said, "Come with me. It will save time." I was glad I had my pajamas on, watching Avril calmly sit down at the dressing table and brush her hair. My mind felt like it was blocked as I looked at her. She was so small, but absolutely perfect. Karen pulled me out of bed. 2 very different women, but both confident. She turned on the water and asked, "Do you want me to take care of everything that happened to us?" I tried by sheer force of will to say no, but my brain nodded, yes. She had a smug, happy wife smile on her face. I had to cut a small moment here so as not to break any rules, but I will remind you that the full stories are on our Patreon. When we came out of the bathroom, Avril had already finished getting dressed. She had put on a crimson lipstick that matched her sly, knowing smile. I'm not stupid. I knew they were setting me up. They maneuvered me. They realized I was attracted to Avril and pushed my buttons. They were so damn sure of themselves and of me. They had that smugness that smart older women have when they're sure of a man. They were so damn sure they were smarter and knew more than the man. I dressed hastily and without breakfast ran up the hill to work. I was happy to have escaped the Dumontet family and Lefebvre. I had work to do. I had an engine to repair. I got everyone together, and the first thing I explained was that the engine needed to be rebuilt. It would no longer be one big monster, but 4 engines in one, sharing an intake and an exhaust. The problem would be getting the fuel to all the chambers evenly. I hoped I had solved my work problem, but I was sure that what awaited me at home was beyond my modest capabilities. The university has formed a team of 16 people for the project. 4 senior PhDs and a dozen graduate students at various levels. We had almost all the specialties needed to build the engine, as well as all kinds of help from a major technical school. We were in an old building. The sports teams had long ago abandoned it and moved to more modern arenas. leaving the huge cavernous building for the monstrous machine that stood where the athletes had once performed. Some weirdo named it Persephone, after the goddess of the underworld. The news of the new design swept over the group like wildfire. It burned up the past and sparked the explosion of the new. The enthusiasm of all these young engineers was overwhelming. For someone whose personal life was in turmoil, it was the perfect distraction. Perhaps too perfect, I realized, when I saw Lisa, my personal assistant, a young woman of about 25, yawn. "What time is it?" I asked. 11:30, Lisa replied. "Impossible. It must be afternoon," I said. "No, PM. It's almost midnight," she said. I looked around. I had 16 men still working like tired spewers. If I let them, they'd work all night, but it wasn't productive. "Everyone, it's time to stop," I called out. "We'll be back tomorrow, but not until noon." I went out last and anchored myself behind the facility. It was a crisp fall night, and the walk was exhilarating. I stopped where the gentle slope on which the university was built transitioned into a steeper slope that led down to the city streets and the river beyond. 11,000 years ago, the Hudson was indeed a mighty river, reaching to where I stood hundreds of feet above its present banks. Now, its smaller course was a silvery ribbon flowing southward. My house, the tallest on the street, silhouetted against the river. Standing high above the house and the river, I realized I was at a tremendous height. A moment had come in my career that I had never even dreamed of. My name will forever be linked to the machine that was being born in the cavernous building behind me. I was happier than a man who had practically lost his home had any right to be. I was working on a job I loved, along with young people who loved it just as much. True, Persephone did not speak to me. She was an indifferent being. Perhaps her rebirth would make her more accessible. The courtyard was dark when I entered through the back gate. The ancient low-voltage floodlights we had installed so long ago were still burning, but they only intensified the night above your ankles. A lone figure, unseen by anyone, waited on the back porch. "You're very late. Karen gave up on you. She went to bed shedding tears that you weren't coming back," Avril said from the darkness, just as she turned on the small porch light. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother anyone. I was just immersed in my work." Even in the dim light of the porch, I could see the distrust in her face. "What would it take for you to forgive her?" Avril demanded. "It's a question I don't have an answer to, but that's not the reason I'm late. We've been working on a new engine. The young men are excited about it. They'd work all night if I'd let them." My cell phone rang as if to confirm my words. "Hi. Yes, Lisa, I'm home, and it's time for you to go to bed. We're working tomorrow. It's a good idea, but it can wait. Good night," I said as I closed my phone. "That's my assistant," I said. "She has an idea to remake the fuel lines out of a different material." Avril laughed. "I should be jealous," she said. "What or who is better?" "The girl on the phone with the man I was trying to seduce," Avril said, as she got up to walk into the house. I followed her up the stairs to the room I'd shared for years with one woman, and now with two. Avril's remark pierced my brain. I pondered her actions. I tried to make manly sense of them. I dismissed the idea of her hitting on me, but she said, "trying to seduce." The table lamp illuminated the room with a warm glow as we entered. "See, I brought him. Stop crying, my love," Avril said, covering Karen's face with her hand. I saw that my wife was crying. The new black satin nightgown she was wearing also caught my eye. I had never seen such a thing before. I froze in place. "We could use a man," my wife said, making room for me. I began to make my way forward, wondering if this was a dream. "No, that's our job. Just come to us. We need you," Avril said. I don't know how long it went on. It seemed to go on forever. I had to cut this moment out a bit too. It ended with 3 exhausted lovers and my utter bewilderment. I was lying down. "Very good. Even better than I thought," Avril muttered. Karen replied. "Do you do that often?" I inquired, for which I received a slap from each of my neighbors. "You're an evil person. First you do this to us and then you insult us," Avril said. "And all we wanted was to bring you fond memories," Karen whispered. "Something special for our man," Avril said. Then we slept. We slept in rapture and contentment. I woke up around 8:30. I would have loved to stay in bed, but someone had to direct what was going to happen today at the old field house. I could have said noon, but I assumed someone in my project would move the time up a bit. 10 minutes later, I was already showered and dressed. I needed a shower. I skipped shaving. Today was Saturday, and I had an engine to assemble. When I emerged from the bedroom, my companions were still sound asleep. The rest of the house, on the other hand, had a lively atmosphere. People seemed to be everywhere. Bonjour, Madame Lefebvre greeted me. Good morning, but why such activity? I asked. You know the young are always at a premium. Did you sleep well? She asked with a slight smile. Yes, isn't it? Pas de deux, I'm just saying. I didn't expect to see you so early. I'm having breakfast with Sarah and Suzanne. How do you like your eggs? Scramble. I was seated in the dining room, or rather, Mrs. Dumont seated me. We were alone when she served me coffee and an omelette worthy of the best restaurant on a plate of ham steak. That's what counts as an omelette when Amy Lefebvre makes it, Sarah Dumont said with a slight chuckle. We were alone when she sat down at the table across from me. So, tell me, are you still in pain or have your women healed the wound? She asked. When I just looked at her over the plate of extravagant food, she smiled and said, My sister-in-law has a distinctive cry of pleasure, and I can also recognize Karen's grunts. Fortunately, Amy's hearing is fine. But we do talk, you know. We didn't expect to see you this early. I have work at the university today, I said. I think you're running away from your problem. Oh, am I in trouble? But of course my son did that to you. Made her his mistress. Your pain is understandable and, I suppose, justified. However, you are a good man. You are reliable in your actions, and I believe you love your wife with all your heart. And yet we women have robbed you of your pride. It's a difficult problem, she said. The omelette was delicious, and the ham had more flavor than the supermarket. My granddaughter found a good butcher yesterday. We'll have a great turkey on Monday, she said. I think the family will survive. Yes, that's what's important. We have our faith, Ma, our pains, but we find a way to move on. Karen is a good woman. Her sin was committed out of love and need. She has paid for it many times over with guilt. She would do anything to spare you the pain she caused. But we both know that is impossible. It is you who must avoid the next sin, she said, pausing and looking at me with blue eyes that had turned pale with age. And what kind of sin is that? Pride. You have to let it go for them. They need you. They? Don't play the fool with me. These women are closer than sisters. They share an absolute love for a man who is no longer here. They have suffered a great loss. And women like my daughter Avril need to grieve in the arms of a man. And my wife? She needs you more than ever? What about last night? I asked. More cafe? Asked Amy, entering the room with a kettle to fill our cups. Then Amy came over to us, smiling. We discussed Rob's problem, Sarah Dumont said. Isn't that a happy problem? Asked Amy. He still doesn't feel well, Sarah said. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. But you'll see they're good women and will take excellent care of you. But perhaps you think 2 women are a burden, Amy reflected. I saw a program on your Southern television program about a man with 4 wives. It seemed like a silly burden. Nonsense. Avril and Karen are capable women. They need a man, yes, but they'll give him more than they'll take. It would be foolish to give up what he has, Sarah said. And what have I got? Said I. They both looked at me, but it was Amy who spoke, and it was spoken from the heart. Love is what you have. Their love and our love, now and always. The walk up the hill was steep but pleasant on a sunny fall day. I had agreed with Karen not to make a resolution until the new year, but it was clear that I would be pressured to accept the current situation as a permanent decision. The older women were right. They were trying to convey to me that we can't change the past. Regrets are silly when we are facing today's problems. It's silly to hate a dead man, and it's rather strange that he took my wife and now I have his own as well. But I had to agree with Amy Lefebvre rather than Sarah Dumont. 2 women are a greater burden than 1. Where have you been? I called, greeted Liz as I walked in. I turned my phone off. And what about, not until noon, didn't you understand? Liz only shook her head as a line formed behind her back of people wanting to talk to me. Everyone was here except the 3 true geniuses who wouldn't show up until they'd solved their individual pieces of the puzzle. If they disappeared for more than 2 days, I had to go looking for them to make sure they didn't get sick from the new problems. Leading a team wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, every team has its own problems. You nudge them from the rear and jump forward when the time is right. Step aside when someone else has the ball and manage the team as best you can. The president of the university called at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The news was already out. We discussed the details. It was a 1-year project. Good money for a relatively specific project that employed a few people and generated some additional income. Now things have changed. The government will be happy, but will own it. Our faculty would be recognized, but the university would need to make itself known before the vultures swooped in. I understood the president's concern. She needed to grab as much as she could while we were still in control. "How many things are unique to us?" she asked. "Everything but the original concept. One of the advantages of the team we've assembled is their savvy and independence. As we speak, they are drawing it from scratch," I said. "She?" "Persephone, the engine is our engine," I said, knowing she was shaking her head at what kind of crazy people it takes to run a university. "Keep me informed and I'll keep you informed," she said. Lunch showed up in the faculty dining room shortly after I spoke to the president on the phone, and they took dinner reservations. What happened? More than one of my co-workers asked. "You've become important. Enjoy it while it lasts." We worked until 9 o'clock in the evening, after which I sent everyone home until 6 o'clock Monday morning. I now had armed guards to enforce the rules, thanks to the administration, which had also started erecting a barrier around the site. The last thing I did before I left was remind Fox that someone should check on the geniuses on Sunday night to make sure they were okay. "Leave your phone on," she called out to me. When I walked into the house, Karen was waiting for me. "Have you had dinner?" she asked. "Yeah, we kind of booked it," I said, without explaining anything. I realized that I hadn't said anything to my wife about the most important event in my professional life. "Are you avoiding us?" she asked. We were in the kitchen in the back of the house. I could hear the guests in the front. It's an old house, and sound travels strangely in it. You could hear the sounds of a big, happy family enjoying time together, but nothing of what they were saying. "I've been working," I said. "Late at night on the weekend?" "Yes." She began to cry. "What do I have to do to be forgiven? Do all our years together mean nothing?" I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay, but I'd be lying, because I really had no idea where we were going. Everything had changed so much in such a short time. We were standing on the threshold of a new, very different life. In order to move forward, I had to adjust to the new way of life and recognize that everything that had gone before was not what it seemed. Karen turned and left me alone in the kitchen. I felt the weight of fatigue come over me and realized that I was deep in a dark and treacherous valley in both my life and my work. At that moment, Aggie walked into the kitchen, followed by Karen's 2 cats. She looked at me, very proud of herself. She had a very large field mouse struggling in her mouth. I knew from experience that Aggie likes to play catch and release. A mouse can have many chances before it finally expires, but not this time. She gave a quick flick of her head, and the mouse stopped resisting. She laid her prize at my feet as if to say, "I am your cat, and this is your home. I have brought you my prize." The other 2 cats came up together and sniffed the dead mouse, then turned and followed Aggie out of the kitchen. The head cat came and showed us who was in charge. She was right, my Aggie. She rid the house of mice for me. This was my house, and she was my cat. I made my way to the front of the house. They were all in the big front living room. The conversation stopped when I walked in. "Karen, Avril, upstairs. We're going to bed," I said. And without waiting for a response, headed up the stairs. They followed me. They had no other choice. What was in the past was gone. It could not be brought back, nor could it be changed. That's life, and as Aggie had shown, it's cruel. The Navy made its appearance a week before Christmas. On a morning that was colder than the usual frosty December day in northern New York, Admiral Dan Kiwi Dickerson arrived in the company of 2 officers of lesser rank. The last time I saw Dan, he was a lieutenant captain on the Ike. It was the spring of 1992, and the ship was headed to Norfolk for maintenance. The Gulf War, my war, was over. Dan was a flight deck officer, not a pilot. He had a very prominent nose, so he was nicknamed the flightless long-billed bird. He was not the most respected of Ike's officers, but he was the affable officer, whom everyone loves and whose faults are tolerated. "Let me introduce you," Admiral Dickerson began, affable as always. "Rob, meet Commander Jack Marlowe and Lieutenant Allison Patrick," he said, pointing to the officers accompanying him. Commander Marlowe was a tall, thin black man, and Lieutenant Patrick was a petite blonde. She was very well built. Their uniforms were the only military detail in their appearance. If these two were once military like me, they had long since become civilians. The blonde had eyes that seemed to move quickly but purposefully. She had a cold smile and was too observant to be anything but a security agent. The man had the soft manners of a professional. "It's been a long time, Dan, and I see you're settling in quite nicely. Let's go say hello to Persephone," I said, leading them to the center of the old field house, where the engine was being lovingly assembled. "What scale are you building this prototype in?" the little blonde-haired lieutenant asked. "Persephone is scale. She's small but strong," I said. We got to the engine. It was only partially assembled, as the parts were made in workshops all over the Northeast US. Very precise puzzle pieces, from which we assembled the Persephone 2.0 model. But her outer shell was in place, the body waiting for her heart and lungs. "How much traction?" asked Dan. "We estimate the pull to be at least 120,000 pounds, I said. "What did you expect exactly?" said Dan. "More, much more," Eddie Davis declared. He was one of the graduate students on the propulsion system. He was tightening the screws of the outer engine housing when he heard the Admiral's comment. Every part was fabricated and fit to the specification my assistants demanded. I may have conceived this baby, but it was up to them to deliver it. "Your men are somewhat oversensitive," Marlowe remarked in an overly professional manner. Of course, I thought, he's a psychiatrist. The Admiral, the policeman, and the psychiatrist had come on a call, but what was the true purpose of their visit? "It is alleged that this engine consumes a lot of fuel. That is the problem you have been assigned to solve," said the junior lieutenant. "That's what the new design solves. That and the need to run air through it," Fox said, joining us. "Mind if we look around and ask a few questions?" said Dan. "No, you pay, but I need to get back to work." "Fox will show you around," I said. "And one more thing. Let me treat you and your ladies to an old-fashioned dinner tonight," Dan offered. At that moment I realized who the bell was ringing for, and I was sure it was me. After all, he said the lady, not the only lady. The fleet came for their prize, but without me, we ended up at my house. Karen was already cooking a roast when I called. 3 more wouldn't be a problem. It just so happened that the people I now considered to be the Axe team had arrived at the house. We ate in the formal dining room. My ladies, as Dan called them, were just happy to put on a show. I guess they thought it helped me in my work. The 2 fake officers immediately hooked up with Karen and Avril. They clearly passed Karen's smell test, but not Avril, who seemed to have a sharper sense of deception. She pampered them a bit, especially the fake lieutenant. Everything was going well until we got to dessert. Karen brought a rum cake that she had made from scratch. There was no need for additional alcohol. Avril had dialed the wine cabinet for company, and following French fashion, bought expensive wine to accompany the dishes. Admiral Dan began by taking a good swig of Johnny Walker Black, and then moved on to Burgundy. By dessert time, the Admiral was already sitting in his cups and telling war stories to everyone gathered. Had he confined himself to his own tall tales, the whole thing might have slipped by. But mine seemed to be much more interesting. So, the crew chief is under the A1, the subsonic bomber, and Iceman, who's Rob, is checking the engine mount when his landing gear fell off. I swear to God, half the men on the flight deck pissed their pants. But not Iceman. The airplane couldn't even get within fingertip distance of him, but he just moved on to the next airplane. "What happened to the crew chief?" asked Avril, crushed like a bug. But if you want my opinion, more fortunate was the midshipman who lost his legs to a broken cable 3 days later. He bled to death while Rob held his hand. G? I watched the blood drain from Avril's face and Karen's face turn into a stone mask. Perhaps this isn't the best after-dinner conversation, suggested the commander. I find our host's heroics very interesting, said the lieutenant. It's hardly heroic when you're just avoiding death, I said. Oh, it's nothing like that, Robbie. Billy Pascal works at the Pentagon. Every day he talks in the bar to anyone who'll listen about that flight over the Persian Gulf he took you on. They're at 30,000 feet at Mach 1 speed when the engine cuts out. Billy does a restart. Nothing, then nothing again. Time to go, he says. But the poor guy is flying the Iceman. Do it again. Comes from the second seat. Nothing. Now try it without fuel. Well, here Billy pees his pants and decides it's too late anyway, so he does it without fuel. Well, doesn't the engine start? Billy swears that as they were climbing back up, they got hit by a wave. Bad fuel, I guess. It didn't affect the stock. Having finished his story, Dan leaned back in his chair, proving some thesis that had eluded me. The lieutenant touched her wine glass. It's strange what a man can do in a crisis. Some men, if you push them, they just thrive, she said, looking at me. Many men die in war for no purpose, because accidents and bullets happen. Women lose their husbands and children lose their fathers, Avril said with fury. I assumed some of that anger was directed at me, but the commander tried to look away. Risk is inevitable if we are to function in life. Every activity involves some risk, he said, not realizing he had dragged me into it. The lieutenant, however, immediately picked up on it. I was just pondering the matter this afternoon. A small engine, completely untried, and it puts out over 100,000 pounds of force. What happens, Professor, if something goes wrong? Why would anything go wrong? I shot back a little too quickly. You expect an engine named after the Queen of Hell to start the first time? The lieutenant said. I looked at Avril and Karen, whose eyes were fixed on me. I never thought she would fail, I said to these two women who I realized at that moment loved me and who I loved. She will not fail. We won't let her. But it's possible. What if it is? Said the commander. Excellent question, Doctor. I'm sorry, but you don't wear your uniform any better than Miss Patrick, said Avril. Let's just say they won't have to tear down that house on the field for the new stadium they're planning to build, Dan said, seeming to sober up a bit as he rejoined the conversation. Rob has always been a risk taker, and that's your main problem, Dan said. So I'm taking a risk. Is that the official line? One of several. There are other safety and identity issues, Patrick said. Am I a security risk? Asked Avril. Just one of them. You're a foreign national and a communist, but Karen's former connections are just as troubling. And then there's the unstable set of weirdos working on the engine. The chief assistant is a strange damsel who's never had a relationship that lasted longer than a week. The rest of the staff seem like social deviants. I think you're going too far, Special Agent, Dr. Marlowe said. Granted, the engine design team seems to have been selected on the principle of social awkwardness, but they are not deviants per se. I commend you, sir, for your ability to manage such a group. Oh, that's Rob's forte. They'd follow him anywhere. 4 people died, and they were still jumping when he called the Gulf. But there's something about leaders who take risks. Of course, it helps if you're as lucky as Rob, Dan said. Luck is up to you, I said. Are you going to tell us superstitious nonsense about how the engines talk? Said Dan. Why should I bother? You're obviously taking the project somewhere else. May I ask where? It's a secret, Agent Patrick said. I'm sorry, but there's too much at stake, Dan said. I would have protested the injustice of stealing other people's labor, but I'm glad the evil creature is leaving, Avril said. That pretty much ended the conversation, but not the project. The weirdos never got over the fact that they had been replaced. They continued the work on their own. Persephone had her own priests and priestesses. They collected her slowly, but slow and steady action often wins the race. It was late Christmas Eve, or rather, early Christmas morning. The house in Mount Royal was asleep. It was a big old house, not as big as ours in Hudson, but big. It had 3 ancient floors filled with visiting relatives. I was around Karen and Avril again by necessity, but the chill that had set in, especially with Avril after dinner with the Admiral, was still very evident. Those who could now be called my extended family were aware of the problem, but did not understand the cause. The only break in the coldness that prevailed between my wives and me came when my son Oscar sat me down and informed me that he was marrying his longtime life partner. Mark, Karen, and Avril sat next to me, holding my hands. It was much less of a shock than they had realized. Moreover, I had nothing to do with it, except to wonder if my son's reserved behavior toward me was due to his orientation. It seemed unfair, as if he was prejudiced against me. It ended with me hugging them both. Oscar's disclosure provided a very brief respite in the Cold War being waged by women. It was frustrating because I understood the problem, but there seemed to be nothing I could do to solve it. I've always found it difficult to stand up to one woman. When you have two opposing you, the fight becomes even more difficult, and even more pointless, because I was agreeing with their position. Persephone was an illicit love. She would take me away from my family if she could. I was a late middle-aged man, salivating over a dangerous young mistress. My women resented her, and resented my attraction to her. Karen and Avril feared what my new mistress might do to me, and desperately demanded that I reject her. Canadian Christmas Eve went well. I enjoyed the day and the family. I was content sitting by the fire in the small guest living room. I was in the front of the house looking out over the street of Montreal. It had just started snowing. I saw a figure reflected in the window pane. It was only a vague shape, but I knew the figure, and I loved it. She hesitated in the doorframe for a moment and then came toward me. Once again I was struck by how small Avril was. "I've tried, but I can't help it," she began, and then stopped to look into my eyes. Her face was beautiful in the glow of the dying fire. "I love you," she said. "That's stupid, because as a man you're always going to hurt women. Why would you believe the boasts of a man who lives in fiction about a past that was not at all what he recalls? In that place and in that time I lived. The fire burned hot, but I lived through it. Those flames are yesterday's conflicts. Sometimes they still haunt me in my dreams, but never when I feel your loving arms around me. You and Karen are the ones begging to put the past behind you. So let that past be in the past. The dead will never come back to life. Blood will never be spilled. The foolishness of youth shall be redeemed by the wisdom of age. I am content at last. Why shouldn't you be content too? But the new machine is dangerous. You hid it from us and named it after the devil. You will choose her over us. She's just a drawing on an easel, parts waiting to be assembled. When she is ready, others will take over. Younger souls who will risk everything and dance their dance with death. I'm too old, and everyone seems to know it except you and Karen." "You promise?" Karen said, wrapping her arms around my neck and pressing her cheek against my cheek. I didn't hear her enter the room. "Are we okay?" asked Karen. It was obvious she was addressing Avril, who nodded her head and snuggled into my arms. "He promised. He's true to his word," Avril said with a new hope in her voice. With those words, I sat Persephone down behind me. Karen came over and sat on the floor, leaning her back against us. The three of us sat and watched the Christmas snow fall on a Montreal street. I realized this was a new and permanent love. Epilogue. The main exhibition gallery was crowded with prominent members of the artistic class. Philippe Dumonte's exhibit, Restoration and Innovation, was open for viewing. I had no idea this man had such a large body of work. His wife and mistress lovingly displayed his work. For the past week, Avril and Karen had been working around the clock to put it all together. It seemed that every day brought them a new crisis. Now their efforts were rewarded with the approval of the assembled cultural elite. I'm afraid I watched the movie with a mixture of resentment and jealousy of my dead rival. But I had to admire the man and his work. They were mostly modern and abstract works, but there was one classic painting, a portrait of his mistress in all her glory. She was on the cover of the museum catalogue and took center stage in the exhibit. My wife, but undoubtedly his mistress. I have accompanied my ladies to evening celebrations, stood under speeches, applause, and watched my women bow out. I heard them tell the enthusiastic crowd about their Philips. It was a tough night for me, especially when Karen spoke. The two women stopped at the back of the crowd in front of Karen's picture. "They say she was already married then," the woman said. "A very understanding husband, perhaps?" replied her companion. "Very understanding," Karen whispered in my ear, taking my hand. Avril walked over and took my other hand. "Time to take you somewhere cozy. It's been a busy day," she said. "Fine, and I'll make you two pay for this evening," I said. The sun had already risen. The first stage had been passed. The alkaline plains of the Black Rock Desert began to reflect the heat. The maintenance crew flanked the short, fat vehicle. The Persephone 5 was nothing like the previous speed record contender, but on its first run that morning, it had easily broken the existing record and raced at an incredible 1,000 miles per hour. "I hope these weirdos know what they're doing," said Crew Chief Al Sporan. He was a 25-year veteran of American aviation. Test pilot Phil Hart had taken him along, for the ride, as he called it. Sporan had almost nothing to do. The car, or rather its engine, was maintained by a dedicated group of technicians. "From what she did this morning, I'd say they must know something," Hart replied. "But the government had bad luck with this engine," Sporan said, in his deep, even voice, making no mention of the 3 men and 1 woman who died before bureaucrats at the Pentagon deemed the costs too high to proceed. A Persephone supporter took her blueprints and a new set of specifications to an abandoned warehouse in Buffalo, New York, and 2 years later, Persephone 5 appeared. She was transported to the plains of Nevada and began testing. Phil Hart was in the sunset of his career and was hoping to emerge with a record that would be worthy of respect. Persephone promised to send him to the other side of the world with a loud sound, one way or another. "The only thing that bothers me is the noise during the first race," Hart said. "Noise?" "Some whispering sound, like she's talking." Sporan only shook his head. They had never used the word "et" in reference to this monster. Persephone was definitely she, and when she came to life, she was as fast, fluid, and powerful as hellfire. It is very likely that she will take you there as well. Persephone was ready. Hart walked to his car and buckled in, after which man and car were towed to the place where the return run across the salt marsh was to begin. The second run required for the record. The sun was already up when Hart made his final checks and counted down the time to the start. Persephone came to life. She had broken the sound barrier and was already past the 1,000 mile per hour mark when Hart heard her. "Faster, faster, faster," she said, a passionate lover. As we bring the curtain down on the second chapter of our gripping narrative, the emotional landscape of our characters grows deeper, revealing the complex interplay of love, loyalty, and personal growth. The dinner conversation between Karen and Rob, interspersed with Rob's haunting memories and Avril's unexpected visit, serves as a poignant reminder of the indelible scars left by both love and war. In this chapter, we see the transformative power of vulnerability and the courage it takes to confront one's demons. Karen's candid confession, Avril's raw display of grief, and Rob's introspective journey highlight the intricacies of human relationships and the resilience needed to navigate through the storm of past mistakes and missteps. Keep in mind, I remind you again, that this is only the first ending of this story, and there is a second ending, which is in this same playlist at the link in the description. The psychological analysis of these events reveals the complex dance between forgiveness and understanding. It demonstrates the human capacity for empathy, forcing us to consider the strength to be found in recognizing our weaknesses. As Rob struggles with his own fears and prejudices, his internal struggle mirrors the external conflict, illustrating the universal quest for redemption and the search for a place of belonging. Avril's poignant story, intertwined with Rob's introspective reflections and Karen's silent strength, emphasizes the complexity of love's many forms. It makes us think about the boundaries we place on love and how it can transcend those boundaries, creating bonds that defy conventional understanding. As we move from tumultuous conflict to the promise of reconciliation, our characters embark on a journey of self-discovery. They face the shadows of their past, finding solace not in erasing their experiences, but in accepting and integrating them into their lives. This chapter serves as a testament to the transformative power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the strong bonds that bind us together. For those who want to delve deeper into the depths of this story, the full version is available on our Patreon. Join us for even more stories like this and better stories. Remember that in the realm of love and life, the journey never ends, it only transforms, leading us to new understandings and unpredictable paths.